Dr. Sebastian Chanos. He is working at the Institute for Physical
the globe.
Physics and Geology, right? In Paris.
Excuse me?
What was the institute?
Yeah.
IPGP?
IPGP is the Institute for Globe Physics, so it's basically it's a geoscience institute. But okay. I do there I do planetary science.
The group means the world, right? Means the Earth. Means the Earth. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But there is a lot of chemistry, Mars exploration. You know, we have built the last the part of the seismometer that has been recently put on Mars surface. So mostly geophysics, but a little bit of planetary science also.
I see that you mentioned to me also that Professor Y.N. Lee, you know, she worked at the institute as postdoc also, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, good. Sebastian, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be with you. So today I'm going to talk about the origin of the moon. And I'm going to show you basically that there is a big debate about the origin of the moon, whereas there is, I would say, a general agreement to say that, that there was a giant impact. Then how the moon formed after the giant impact is a heavily debated questions. So what I'm going to show you, of course, I'm going to do like a general talk. I'm going to also to show you some of the work of people who work with me. So I would like to mention Paolo Sossi, which is in Zurich, Yuening, that is in Taiwan, in Taipei also, and Laetitia Alibert, that is now working in Berlin as a postdoc with Kai. Okay, so here, so just to put you some numbers, I'm sure you already know them, but they will be useful to remember. So the moon is about 1,700 kilometer radius. So it's about 1/4 of the size of the Earth. And today it is located at about 60 Earth radii. That is about 380 kilometers. And as you know, the moon orbit is synchronized like all natural satellites. Okay, all satellites we know in the solar system are in this dynamical configuration. Okay. Okay, so but there is a lot of arguments to say that the moon has not been here for all the solar system history. Today, the moon orbit at 60 Earth radii, so it's beyond the synchronous orbit of the Earth. So it means that because of tidal interaction between the Earth and the moon, the moon feels a positive torque from the Earth. So it means that moon is gaining angular momentum. So the orbit of the moon expands with time. But since angular momentum is conserved, the back reaction of that onto Earth is that the Earth spin decreases. Okay, so the moon goes away, and the day of and the spin of the Earth gets smaller, and this is something that is measured, in fact, almost every week. So here you see an observatory that is in the south of France, in Calerne, so it's near the French Riviera, and every week they do a laser beam ranging of the Earth-Moon distance. So they shoot to mirrors that has been put on the moon surface by the Apollo mission in the 60s and 70s. And what is measured is that the moon is going away at about a rate of 4 centimeters per year. And the back reaction onto the Earth is that the Earth day increase by about 2 microseconds per year. Okay, so this is somewhat well constrained. So all that tell you that in the past, it is quite very possible that the moon did not form where it is today, but it is very possible that 4 billion years ago, maybe the moon was much closer to Earth. And of course, there is a lot of uncertainties on the moon orbital evolution on 4 billion years, but it seems very possible that the moon was only located at a few Earth radii, like 3 to 5 Earth radii, when it formed about, we think, 4 4 billion, 4.5 billion years ago. Okay. So this is about orbital evolution of the moon. Okay, now what about the, I would say, geochemical constraint on the moon? It gives also information about the context of moon formation. First, the moon average density, as you know, is much lower than the Earth. So we understand that because moon is highly depleted in iron compared to Earth. The moon has a very small iron core, okay? But so how to explain that? So model of moon formation do not have much difficulties to explain that. But another element that, another piece of very important information and that is very constraining on moon formation comes from the study of lunar samples. As you know, we have brought, thanks to the American mission and now thanks to the Chinese mission, a lot of samples from the moon surface. About 400 kilograms of lunar material has been brought back to Earth. And those lunar material has revealed a lot of very interesting things. So I will not do a complete overview of all the results of moon samples, only those who I think are very constraining and for the context of the moon formation. First, it seems that the moon is covered by feldspar and in a kind of minerals that are called anorthosite. So, you know, I am an astronomer, I'm not a geochemist, so I have discovered a few years ago what was an anorthosite, and I have discovered why it was so important. So anorthosite are very important because those minerals are known to float above magma ocean. When you have a magma ocean, anorthosite form first, okay? And when it's cooling, anorthosite form first. And those minerals can float very easily at the surface of magma ocean. So the massive presence of anorthosite at the surface of the moon can be considered as a signature that there was maybe a magma ocean, a very early magma ocean on the moon. So maybe the moon was molten. We don't know to which extent, okay? And what is interesting is that if you do like modelization of cooling of magma ocean, and if you compare to a geochronological measurement, what you get is that maybe the full magma ocean of the moon cooled in about a few hundred millions of years, okay? But the anorthositic crust is that this kind of very thin, solid crust that can cover the moon may form much more rapidly, maybe in less than 1,000 years only. And this has been shown in simulation, okay? So it's very possible that there was a magma ocean that was covered very rapidly by a kind of stagnant lid, an anorthositic crust. But below the magma ocean, it took more like hundreds of million years to fully cool down. Okay. So this may be considered as a sign of a hot start of the moon. Another very important piece of element also comes from the study of moon samples. The study of moon samples have revealed that the moon has a lot of similarities with Earth's mantle. In this graph, you see a comparison of the moon material compared to Earth's mantle. And it is plotted as a function of different elements. And here you have refractory elements. It is elements that vaporize at very high temperature. And here you have volatile element. It is elements that vaporize at low temperature. Low temperature, I mean less than 1000 Kelvin. And what you see when you compare moon to Earth is that for the refractory elements, abundances of refractory elements are exactly the same in the moon and in the Earth's mantle. There is almost no measurable difference. But for volatile elements, it seems that the moon is strongly depleted in moderately volatile to volatile element. So all that tells you that it's very possible. It gives you the idea that the moon material is very similar to the mantle of the Earth, with the exception that the volatile element has gone away. Has gone away, at least in part. Okay, maybe not fully gone away. And this seems to be confirmed by the isotopic composition of moderately volatile elements. You have a lot of elements, zinc, potassium, chlorine, rubidium, where the moon crust is enriched in heavy isotopes. It's a sign, it can be considered as a sign of evaporation. The case of chromium is interesting. So here is a paper by Societal 2018, where you see in this graph that the moon is depleted. The moon is depleted in heavy element of chromium compared to the Earth. But if you do a thermodynamic calculation, what you can show is that this depletion can be explained by vaporization of chromium at about a temperature of 1600 K. So all those elements seems to tell you that there was a kind of evaporation process or incomplete condensation. It's not very clear for the moment, that maybe made the abundance of volatile element quite low in the moon. Another piece of information also comes from the isotope, oxygen isotopic composition. And as you know, oxygen has 3 isotopes: oxygen 16, 17, and 18. And here you see in this plot, the ratio of 17 to 16 and 18 to 16 in different populations of solar system material. So here you have some meteorites, here you have the Earth-Moon system, here you have Vesta, and here you have carbonaceous chondrites. What is very interesting for the moment is that all objects of the solar system has a different ratio of 16, 17, and 18. And today, and there is such variability in the 16, 17, 18 ratio that the oxygen isotopic composition is even used to identify sometimes the origin of of meteorites on Earth. Okay. So, and the origin of the variation of the 16, 17, 18 isotopic ratio in the solar system for the moment is still not understood. There is a lot of debates about that. Basically, it seems that there was a source of oxygen 16 in very early in the solar system. But there is one exception to that rule, is if you compare the Earth and the Moon. The Earth and the Moon have almost exactly the same isotopic ratio of 16, 17, 18. Exactly, they all fall on the same line that is called the terrestrial fractionation line. This is this blue line here. And basically what it tells to you is that it's highly probable that in fact, it is exactly the same material. So we do not see big evidence. We have strong evidence that maybe the Earth and the Moon material are in fact maybe exactly the same. So there is still debate about that because sometimes super high microprobe measurement of isotopic composition may find little difference between the Earth and the Moon, but those little differences are really, really super small compared to any other solar system object. And that's it. Okay. So if you put all things together, you get the simple idea is that the Moon, very roughly speaking, could be made of Earth mantle material, okay, that has been heated to devolatilize heat. So how is it possible? Is it compatible with the formation of Moon simulation? And this is what I'm going to explain now. And also we are going to see if there are some alternative hypotheses. Okay. So now let's put the Moon formation in what we know of the context of solar system formation. So as you know, we have a theory of solar system, of planetary system formation. There are a lot of things that are still not understood in planet formation, but there is a general agreement that formation of planetary system goes more or less like that. You form the star and you form what is called a protoplanetary disk. Then after you have a sedimentation of the grain in the disk midplane. And then after the grains, they grow. They first form planetesimals. Then after they form planetary embryo. And in about, let's say, 1 to 3 million years, then the gas disappears. And you are left with a system with hundreds of planetary embryos in the solar system. Okay. But this time, by about a few million years after the sun formation, giant planets are already formed, but terrestrial planets are not formed. There are still a collection of planetary embryos. Here is a simulation of the evolution of the inner solar system from 0 to 200 mega years. Here, this is eccentricity. Here, this is semi-major axis. and the color is the water fraction. And in this simulation, what you see is that years after years, start 1 million years, 30 million years, 200 million years, then you have a lot of collisions between all those planetary embryos. And in about 100 to 200 million years, you end up with a few terrestrial planets only that has experienced a few from a tenth of giant impacts. And this is the end of the system. So it seems that the best moment to form the moon is maybe in this period of giant impacts that may take place, let's say, from 3 to maybe 100 million years after the formation of the sun. Okay. So, and we do think that it's about when the moon formed. Okay, so now let's focus on the moon. So now, what could have happened for the moon formation? So as you know, the theory of giant impact has been heavily studied first by our colleague that is working in Boulder today, that is Robin Canup. And Robin Canup has performed the first, before there was Willy Benz, of course, but there was a series of very seminal papers by Robin Canup in the year 2000 that proposed that a Mars-sized impactor impacted the proto-Earth. So it is what is called the canonical impact. So the canonical impact, here is a little video. You have a Mars-sized impactor that collide with the proto-Earth at about the escape velocity, okay? And you see that the proto-Earth is molten, and you see that you form a debris disk, a hot debris disk around the proto-Earth, okay? One important aspect of the canonical model is the fact that the initial angular momentum of the system is the same as today. So the idea is that the system does not exchange angular momentum with exterior. And so the initial budget of angular momentum is the same as today. So it seems to work. It's very interesting. You melt the moon and you see that it's a super hot event. Here you have the temperature that is displayed in color. And you see that it can reach temperature from 2000 to 7,000 Kelvin. It's quite a hot event, but you will see that we can get even hotter event. And you see that you form this debris disk. Okay, here another simulation. Okay, so does it seem to work? Alors, well, if you look at the simulation, there is always something that is missing. In fact, it is whereas we have very nice simulation of a giant impact on the proto-Earth, okay, we never see the moon forming in those simulations. Alors, why do we never see the moon forming? For simple reason. Because those simulations only extend on very short time scale. When you look at the simulation here, for example, this one, the time scale in this simulation is a few hours to a few tens of hours, okay? So with such a short simulation time, it's not possible to track the evolution of the system up to the apparition of the moon. This is the first piece of element. The second piece of element is that those hydrodynamical simulation called SPH simulation, most of them consider adiabatic. They are adiabatic, so you do not have cooling. You do not have cooling in the cooling process in the simulation. In particular, you do not have radiative transfer. So it means that the simulation cannot cool, okay? You do not have cooling process. So it means that you cannot consider the simulation to be valid over long time scales, okay? So those simulations are very useful. They teach us a lot, but they are not adapted to track the long-term evolution of the system. So in those simulations, you never see the moon forming. So what people do, basically, they try to derive what would be the mass of the forming moon by considering information like conservation of mass and conservation of angular momentum. But there has been, after a series of work, to try to compute what would be the characteristic of a moon that would grow in this debris disk surrounding the Earth after the giant impact. So in fact, today we see the picture as following, in fact. The the moon may not form just directly after the giant impact. There must be a kind of intermediate phase after the giant impact where you have a kind of strange disk that is called the protolunar disk. It has another name in some model. It is also called synestia in some model. So you have an impact, you form a debris disk around the Earth, and I'm going to talk about this debris disk, that is the protolunar disk, and after some time, we will see how long, after some time, the moon may form from this debris disk, and at about a few Earth radii. Why at about few Earth radii only? Because it's a very well-known result of planetary science that around a planet, there is a region that is called the Roche limit from the French physicist Edouard Roche. Okay, and this Roche limit is typically three planetary radii. So inside the Roche limit, material cannot accrete into body, and in this region you may have rings or disk. This is typically the case of Saturn rings. Saturn rings are contained between 3 Saturn radii. And why do you have rings around Saturn? Because tidal forces prevent any accretion of big bodies. Okay, but beyond more or less 3 planetary radii, the so-called Roche limit, accretion is possible. And then you can form satellites. And if you go back to planetary rings in the solar system, you see that all rings in the solar system have more or less a sharp edge, where below the Roche limit you have rings, and beyond the Roche limit you do not have rings anymore. You do not have dense rings anymore. You have collections of satellites. So if we put that in the context of moon formation, it's very possible that the moon form beyond the Roche limit, where material can accrete. Okay, that is roughly 3 Earth radii. It's not a proof, it's a general consideration. So some researchers have tried to investigate the moon formation after the giant impact. So I'm going to show you very nice simulation of Takeda and Ida. Okay, so here in this simulation, it's an n-body simulation with rebound, with a dissipative rebound between the particles. And we start from a disk of debris. So we do not simulate the giant impact. We just start from the debris disk. And we look at how the disk evolves with time. And what you see is that very rapidly, so after 6 orbits, you form spiral waves here, like in a galaxy. It means that the disk is gravitationally unstable. Okay, so there is a very strong transfer of angular momentum towards the exterior. And after only about, let's say, a tenth of orbit, you start to see little aggregates forming at a few planetary radii. And this is seen from above and seen from the side. From the side, you see that the debris disk collapses because of collisional dissipation and becomes thinner and thinner. If I now go to more recent simulation, you see here that here the Roche limit is located here. And you see that in a few tenths of orbit, typically you start to form dense aggregates just beyond the Roche limit, whereas the disk itself remains as a disk inside the Roche limit. And if you follow the accretion of a proto-moon in those simulations, here is a nice simulation by Kokubo et al. 2000, you see that this is the time in a Keplerian orbit at the Roche limit. This is the mass of the moon, okay? And you see that the moon mass, you reach about 90% of the moon mass in only 3 weeks. So, so it's a super short time scale. But what does it mean? Does it mean that the moon formed in 3 weeks, just after the giant impact? We do not think it is a real interpretation of the simulation. 3 weeks is just the characteristic spreading time scale of the debris disk when it is self-gravitating, okay? So it just means that when the disk becomes self-gravitating, the moon forms very rapidly. But the thing is that the disk must cool down before it becomes self-gravitating. So what controls the formation timescale of the moon after the giant impact is not just the transport of angular momentum. It is the cooling down of the debris disk after the giant impact. And there has been a lot of debates about how long it takes for the debris disk to cool down after the giant impact. And you will see that it is not an easy question to answer. Because this disk, here, this disk has been modelized by simple n-body simulation of hard spheres, okay? But in fact, the physics of this disk is much more complex. It's a very complex disk where the thermodynamical condition tells you that, in fact, this disk is liquid, and this is very exotic in astrophysics to have liquid, disk, okay? So this disk must be liquid, topped by a turbulent atmosphere, okay? So you have phase transition, you have radiative cooling, you have viscous heating. So there is a very, it's a very complex disk, and this disk is still, the physics of this disk is not very well understood at all. If you do just simple estimate of cooling at constant effective temperature, you get time scale of about 100 to 1000 years. So all depends on the heating process, and the heating processes are not very well constrained. There could be some heating via, for example, turbulence or things like that. Okay, so is it the end of the story? Does it mean that we have a clear picture of the moon formation with only some uncertainties? Well, in fact, there was a big crisis 10 years ago. It's a crisis among scientists. So I'm not sure that the world has heard about that. In fact, people began to understand that there was problem in this simple picture of moon formation. Well, if you look at the canonical simulation, I remind you, is a simulation with a Mars-size impactor. What you see is that, I don't know if you see very well this column, but what you see, people has measured what fraction of the disk mass was composed of Earth material or composed of the impactor material, okay? And what you see is that in the canonical simulation, the disk is composed by more than 70% of the impactor material. So the implication of that, if you believe those numbers, is that the disk is not dominated by Earth material, but rather by impactor material, okay? And this is a problem because if you remember the start of my presentation, I told you that at least for the oxygen isotopic composition, it seems that the oxygen isotopic composition of the moon is exactly the same as the Earth's mantle. So and if the moon was made of impactor material, you could expect reasonably to measure mostly the oxygen isotopic composition of the impactor, okay? And as far as we know, all objects in the solar system has different oxygen isotopic composition. So it is quite difficult to explain the identity of the moon and Earth's oxygen isotopic composition. So it was considered as a big problem, and it is still considered as a big problem. Is that how is it possible that the moon is made of impactor material, but still has the composition of the Earth, at least for oxygen? So there is a recent paper, but it is quite debated, that maybe has proposed an alternative solution, that if you consider that the moon is fully molten, maybe you may obtain another result. But for the moment, I would say that it is still debated. And this result has to be confirmed by a new simulation. But it's maybe an alternative that if you change the rheology of the material, you may change this result. But the result that the canonical impact yields a composition that is the same as the impactor has been confirmed by many different groups. So, okay, so I've already talked about that. So to reconcile the canonical impact with oxygen isotopic composition of the Earth, there was a popular explanation that has been, I would say, qualitatively proposed by Pallavan and Stevenson in 2007, is to say that maybe if you have a lot of mixing in the protoplanetary disk, maybe you can equilibrate the Earth's mantle and the protolunar disk, okay, before the moon forms. In that case, maybe turbulence can homogenize everything and may explain why you measure exactly the same thing in the Earth's mantle and in the moon, okay? But this explanation today is considered maybe as a good explanation. It's considered maybe as a possibility to explain that. But the only thing is that it's very difficult to compute because depending on the characteristic of the impacts, the protolunar disk has very different characteristics in terms of surface density, temperature. And so it is still an open question. It's not clear if turbulence in the protolunar disk can mix efficiently material. So it's why there was after another generation of models that has been proposed. So here is a paper by Chook and Stewart 2012 that take another approach. That say, okay, so there is a very strong assumption. Let's assume that the Earth was spinning very fast initially, like in about 2 hours rather than 4. So they do not assume conservation of angular momentum. They assume that the Earth-Moon system had initially a higher angular momentum than today. Okay. So they assume a very fast spinning Earth, and they do an impact with a very fast small object. So you do an impact with a small object that goes very fast, about 2 times escape velocity of Earth, and you destroy the Earth like that. You impact the Earth like that. So here is a simulation. Here you see other simulation. So this kind of impact is very energetic. Okay, is energetic. And why is it interesting to consider this hypothesis? Well, is it interesting? Because in that case, what you see the fraction of material in the disk. You see the fraction of material in the disk that is extracted from the planet. And you see that now, the vast majority of material in the disk comes from Earth's mantle. So in this kind of scenario, it's called fast spinning Earth scenario. In this kind of scenario, most of the disk material come from the Earth's mantle. So it seems to reconcile, it seems to be in better agreement with the known composition of the moon. But there is still a little problem. It is the question of angular momentum, because this kind of model has too much initial angular momentum. So you have to find a way to extract angular momentum of the Earth-Moon system. So in the same paper, there was I would say, a dynamical simulation that has been developed by Matthias Chook. Okay, and basically what it shows you is that if during the orbital expansion of the moon, you have a resonance with the sun, it is called an evection resonance with the sun. It is when the precession rates of the moon, become similar to the rotation period of the Earth around the sun. Then you can extract angular momentum from the Earth-Moon system and put this angular momentum into the sun. And what they show is that then the total angular momentum budget decreases with time. Okay. And they show that depending on some assumption about the internal dissipation of the moon, there are solutions where you can get the 2-day angular momentum of the Earth-Moon system. Okay, so it's an interesting, it's a very interesting kind of model. The only problem is that it's very model dependent, because it's very dependent on what kind of dissipation you assume inside the moon. It depends on your tidal model, and you know tidal models are not very well constrained. Do you assume like frequency independent tides? We do not know. Do you assume frequency dependent tides? We do not know. So so here there are still some questions, but it can be considered as a very serious alternative to the canonical model. Alors, is it completely a new idea? In fact, this idea, I'd just like to mention, is not completely new, in fact. Because why? There is a simple way to understand why do you put so much mantle material into the disk for the fast spinning Earth. Well, the idea is that simply when you have a fast spinning Earth and when it collides with a fast impactor, in fact, you increase the rotation of the Earth, and simply by centrifugal force, you extract the mantle of the Earth and put it in orbit. And this idea has some similarities, I think it's worth to mention, with the first theory of moon formation that was initially proposed by George Darwin, the son of the famous Richard Darwin. Okay, And that was an astronomer. And by the end of the 19th century, he proposed that the moon was centrifugally extracted from the Earth. And he proposed that it was the origin of the Pacific Ocean. Okay. So, but at this time, we did not know plate tectonics. But the basic idea is that if you have a very fast spinning Earth, it is much easier to extract the mantle and put it in orbit. Another interesting characteristic of the fast spinning Earth model is that it's a very energetic process, much more energetic than the canonical model. In that case, Locke and Stewart has shown that the system after the impact is quite different from the canonical impact. In fact, everything is molten, okay? And most of the material is in fact vaporized, and even the Earth is fully molten. And what have they shown? What they have shown is that you have a continuity between the Earth and the disk. You cannot really make a separation between the two anymore. It becomes a kind of donut that is differentially rotating, and they have called this structure a synestia. Okay. For me, it's a variant of a protolunar disk. It is a very hot version of the protolunar disk, but it is what they have called synestia. And in their synestia, well, you have a gas made of vaporized mineral. This gas cools down, and material recondenses progressively. And the modelization of the synestia and protolunar disk is very complex. And for the moment, there is no time-dependent model that has been developed for that. So now what about the question of devolatilization? Well, we may think that since there is an agreement that the moon start was very hot, it would be easy to explain the observed devolatilization of moon material. Because we have this idea that when material is hot, the vapor goes away, then you are left with refractory rich material. Well, this picture is a little bit too simple, and it turns out that people have tried to study how you can devolatilize material. And for example, Nakajima and Stevenson in 2014 come with a very interesting result, is that it's almost impossible to extract volatiles from the Earth-Moon system, simply because the Earth's gravitational field is very strong, okay? And in addition, you have to see that you are in a hydrogen-poor system, and so it's dominated by oxygen that is a heavy atomic species, okay? So it's very difficult to extract mineral oxygen, sodium, potassium, from the Earth-Moon system because it's trapped in the gravitational field of the Earth. So if you want to devolatilize the moon, you cannot just extract vapor from the Earth-Moon system. Basically, vapor do not go away. It has to be put somewhere, and it has to leave the moon in a way or another, but it cannot leave the system. So how can you do that? So here we are more or less at the edge of what is known today. Okay, there has been many attempts to explain how to separate refractory material from volatile material in those different models. Okay, so here is a better picture of the protolunar disk or synestia. So here you have the molten Earth. You have a liquid magma disk in the midplane of the protolunar disk. And this liquid magma disk is, we think, it's maybe made of refractory material. Why refractory material? Because it can condense at higher temperature. So initially, you may have a separation between a liquid disk that is refractory rich and a vapor atmosphere that is volatile rich. Okay. Then you have radiative cooling from the photosphere of the disk. Okay, and you have viscous heating. Okay. And what we think, as I told you, is that interior to the Roche limit, you may have the disk. So this is about 3 Earth radii, but exterior to the liquid disk, then accretion could be possible. So we think that maybe the disk stops more or less at the Roche limit, okay? Because beyond, tides are weak enough to allow accretion. So we all consider that maybe the moon formed around 3 Earth radii beyond the Roche limit. And in this Roche limit, so initially, beyond the Roche limit, you may expect that the proto-moon may be made of refractory rich material. Okay. But the only problem is that when the disk cools down, okay, vapor recondense, volatile rich vapor recondense into a solid phase. And the big question is how to separate the volatile from the refractory material, because ultimately, when the disk is below 1000 K, all sodium potassium recondense and should be reincorporated in the proto-moon. So you have to find a mechanical way to separate vapor from refractory material when the disk is still very hot, so very early. So here there have been several attempts. So I will not go into the details. For the moment, there is absolutely no consensus of what is the right answer, okay? But it seems that you have to invoke some, I would say, not super easy mechanism to separate vapor from liquid. So in Canup et al. 2015, Canup this work invoke a tidal torque. It means that the disk tidally torques the proto-moon and maintains the moon away. Okay, so it's a gravitational effect that separates the vapor from the liquid. Okay. In a work that I have done with Chloé Michaud in 2015, we have proposed another alternative. We have proposed that the liquid and the gas has different viscosity. So since they have different viscosity, the spread have different rates. Okay. So you may have a mechanical separation between the two. Okay. A key aspect of that is that we have proposed that maybe the gas could be magnetized and maybe subject to magneto-hydrodynamical instability, magneto-rotational instability. And then there was a series of papers by Gamy, Carballino that have shown that in fact MRE is possible, that this may help to separate the two. And more recently, you have the work of Locke and Stewart with the synestia that propose the drag of droplets into the gas maybe may separate the refractory material from the gas. So for the moment, we are left with three hypotheses, and there is no clear consensus on which is the right one. Those three hypotheses are debated in a recent paper by Reiter 2019 about the accretion of the moon core. And I have almost finished. I just would like to mention, I would say, another class of model that may be based on simpler physics and that maybe at least brings some more simple solution to the question of lunar devolatilization. And so this is a work I have developed recently with my collaborators. And this kind of idea has been also recently proposed by Tang and Jung in 2020. Okay, we propose a much simpler thing, but that is not in opposition to what we have seen, but that would be a complementary process, okay, to what we have seen. So if we assume that the moon was molten initially, okay, let's imagine that the proto-moon is already formed at a few Earth radii, and the moon is covered by a lunar magma ocean. Then what we have shown is that, let's imagine that so the volatile material can escape from the lunar magma ocean. And we have shown, it's very easy to show, if you assume that material can leave the moon's surface, it's easy to show that the material cannot come back to the moon. Let's imagine that you have some vapor leaving the moon magma ocean. Here you have the Earth, you have the moon. Here you have trajectory of gas around the Earth-Moon system. And you see when the gas leaves the moon, it cannot come back to the moon for dynamical reason, because it has to go through the Lagrange points. And if the gas loses just a little bit of energy by cooling or by friction, then it cannot go back to the moon surface, and the material will be put in orbit around the Earth. Okay, so it tells you that if there was a way to escape the moon surface, vapor material cannot go back to the moon. So maybe it's a good way to devolatilize the moon. But the question remains how to lift off material from the moon surface. So what we have done here, we have investigated what is called hydrodynamical escape. So you have a hot magma ocean. So the gas is very hot just above the surface. and so it feels a very strong pressure gradient. So the gas is accelerated upward. It's hydrodynamical escape. And here, the Earth's tidal fields play a very crucial role because of the proximity of the proto-moon to the Earth, 3 Earth radii, the Earth's tidal gravitational fields can facilitate escape from the moon, okay? Because it lowers the energy barrier to escape from the moon's surface. In short, it decreases the escape velocity of the moon when the moon is close to the Earth. And what we have shown here, you see the distance to the moon's surface, and here you see the velocity of the gas. We have shown that depending on the starting temperature, the gas can be accelerated upward and become what is called transonic. It's like what is called a Parker wind, is that the gas can have a net, can become transonic and escape the moon gravitational field region that is in green here, that is called the Hill sphere. In that case, what we have found is that you may have an intense flux of gas leaving the moon magma ocean. And here in this graph, we have computed this flux as a function of the Earth-moon distance. So here, for example, if you take the flux at the green, the red line, you see that when the moon is very close to the Earth, the flux is about 10 to the minus 5 moon mass per year. But when the moon goes away, it becomes increasingly difficult to leave the moon and the flux decreases. So it seems that if you have a molten moon, in fact, the atmosphere above the magma ocean is not hydrostatic at all. It can be heavily in a hydrodynamical escape regime. Okay. And so we have done several studies, and what we have found is that it is possible to reproduce at least the moon content in sodium, in potassium, for different moon temperature. So here you have sodium, potassium, and zinc. If you have the range of measurement in lunar sample, that is the blue squares, and all the colored lines that you see are different evaporation scenario. Okay. Different temperature, fractionated or equilibrium scenario. And for a range of temperature, in the range of about 1,800 K, typically we find that we can match sodium and potassium. So we were very happy with that. But then after we were much sadder because we can never match the abundance of zinc. Always, what we find is that if you match sodium and potassium, then you have almost no zinc anymore in the moon. And this is in disagreement with observation because we do still zinc. So here there is a mystery with the zinc. So some geochemists, but the zinc seems to have, I would say, a complex mineralogy. And it's possible that zinc may combine with some element to sink in the magma ocean. So maybe this could be an explanation for the observation of zinc today. But at least for 2 species, we may have a pretty good fit to the observed abundance. And also what is very interesting is that if you want to play the zinc and potassium, the sodium and potassium abundance, you have to shut down evaporation very rapidly, okay? You cannot evaporate for millions of years because there would not be any potassium and sodium left anymore in the system. You have to shut down the system. And we have computed here what would be the time at which evaporation shut down as a function of surface temperature, okay? And this, what you see, it is for different scenarios of moon tidal expansion. I will not go into details, but the take-home message is that to explain the sodium and potassium abundance, you have to shut down evaporation between 100 and roughly 1,000 years only. And interestingly, this matches pretty well what we think about the time scale of formation of anorthositic lead at the moon surface, okay, that is thought to form in less than 1,000 years. If you look at paper by Elkin Stanton of Tang and Young, let's say between 200 and 1,000 years. So it's interesting to see that, what we suggest is that the formation of the anorthositic lead may have shut down evaporation of the moon, and we have I would say a qualitative match, an order of magnitude match between the time scales. Okay, so I have more or less finished this presentation. So in conclusion, you see that understanding the moon formation needs a multidisciplinary approach, mixing numerical simulation, laboratory measurements, etc., etc. And to this respect, moon lunar samples are very important to have because they have brought a wealth of information. Okay. Whereas there is no agreement on the full characteristic of the moon formation process, there is a general agreement that there was a giant impact, there was a hot phase, but still the question is how the moon was extracted from the protolunar disk or the Synestia model, and how can it explain the today composition of the moon. You have seen that there is a kind of two different way of thinking the moon giant impact. Either in short, either you conserve angular momentum, but you have a problem with the composition because the moon would be made of impactor material. That is the canonical scenario. Or you do not conserve angular momentum, okay? But in that case, you can have a good composition. But where is the truth between the two? For the moment, it's not completely clear, okay? And you have this big suspect. It is the protolunar disk, which physics for the moment is not very well described. And it's a big problem because we think that a lot of material processing may appear in the protolunar disk. So here there is still a lot of place for improvement. Okay. And recently, just to finish, you have those new types of model that invoked a late evaporation of the moon magma ocean. It may explain some of the characteristics of the depletion of volatile element in the moon mantle. So you see that it's an ongoing work, all that. For the moment, you have some, I would say, big ideas, and there is a lot of place for improvement. I thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sebastian. This is a very, very nice, extremely useful general review of the, of the lunar formation models. Let me ask the audience whether there are questions from the audience. If you have questions, please unmute yourself. Unmute your computer and ask the questions. Anyone want to ask Sebastian questions? The one thing I want to ask Sebastian that since you have been working on the new model, you must come back, and give another talk to lay out the detail of the physics. Yeah. Yeah. And, writing some equations, and then to explain, more, the details of the analytical problem. It's just complicated, but I think it's very well worth, to learn from you. Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, can I have a, oh, sorry.
It's okay, go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have a question that was from very, very beginning. I came a bit late, so maybe you have talked about this. Question is, this in this model, where does this near side always face Earth, this phenomena fit in or happens?
When was the moon? When the moon got the synchronous rotation? Is that your question?
Yes, that's my question.
Alors, in fact, it comes from the very beginning because here, here in a simulation of aggregates formation. You see my PowerPoint here? You see, so here in those n-body simulation of aggregate formation, so here you have the Earth, you have the protolunar disk here, and here you have the Roche limit. And you see the little aggregates here. When they form, they are already in synchronous rotation. So we think that the aggregates that form the moon were already in synchronous rotation when the moon formed. Okay, and why would they be in synchronous rotation? It is simply because the Earth's tides are very strong. So the Earth's gravitational field exerts a very strong torques on those objects. Okay, and you see that those objects are elongated. So there is the torque exerted on those objects is very strong. So the standard view today is that the moon was formed already in synchronous orbit. But at this time, the orbital time scale was much shorter than today. It was a few hours only, okay? And today, the orbital period of the moon is 27 days.
So there was another question from someone, I think. Can you want to ask that question now?
It was actually me. So sorry, Seb, I want to ask a slightly off-topic question. So is there any analogy or similarity between the formation of the moon and the icy satellites of the giant planets?
It's a very good question, and it's not clear. It's not clear because for the formation of the satellites of the giant planets, for the moment, giant impact, the only planet for which giant impact is invoked is Uranus, because you know that Uranus is very inclined, and we think that giant impact may have led to formation of maybe Uranus satellite, okay? But it has never been invoked for Jupiter and Saturn. And, would it be, for the moment, I would say that formation of satellite of Jupiter are much closer to formation of planets in the solar system. For Jupiter, it is supposed to be like accretion in a disk around Jupiter, very similar to the protoplanetary disk. But for the liquid, for the case of the moon, okay, the case of the moon is very different from the giant planet satellite formation scenario. The main difference is it is the mass ratio of the moon to the Earth. The moon is about 1% of the Earth's mass. It is enormous, okay? Okay. Whereas if you look at the mass ratio of Jupiter or Saturn satellite, the mass ratio is about 10 to the minus 4. So it's much closer to the planet to sun mass ratio, okay? The problem with the moon is that you have to form a super big satellite, 1% of the Earth's mass. And so it's why you have to invoke a very dense, very compact disk around the Earth, and it's why, and such a disk we think can be done by a giant impact.
Okay, thank you.
So you think that Pluto-Chiron system also formed by impact, giant impact?
Yeah, I did not talk about Pluto, but it is true that it is a standard theory, because for the Pluto-Charon case, the mass ratio is 10%. Charon is about 10% of Pluto's mass. So there is also a giant impact that is invoked, okay, and it seems to work. The only problem is that, there is no. My understanding is that still there are problems with the formation of other satellites. Okay, but I'm not very familiar with that. It seems that giant impacts may easily explain the formation of Charon, the satellite of Pluto, but it cannot easily explain the formation of a population of smaller Pluto satellites. But I cannot go much in details. Yeah.
Okay, I think that we have more or less run out of time, but I must tell our audience that. No, I say that we are almost running out of time, and then we reach the end of the seminar. But I want to tell everybody that Sebastian has all kinds of ideas. You know, he could talk for hours, and then I will write to him immediately to ask him to come back to talk about his model, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Sebastian.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very honored. Yeah.
Thank you.